But it's so necessary to be out there in the market so that whenever that target or ideal client is viewing it for the first time, they're seeing it. It's something that we don't want to forget about is the typical branding message that is, on repeat. We may say it a bunch of different ways, many different display options throughout the market, but it's a continued process that you want to keep on so that it's there when the buyer is ready.
Thank you for joining the Missing Half podcast, where we're discovering what's missing in manufacturing and B2B marketing. Today, we're going to continue our conversation on branding and how it impacts manufacturing and B2B companies. Today, we've brought together some of our team from 50 Marketing to extend the conversation beyond the theoretical and get very tactical and down in the weeds of how branding is impacting companies today. So today, we're joined by some very special guests. Andrea Sanner, Ryan Collier, and Johanna Jenis. Thank you for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having us.
So you would think, guys, after I do all these podcasts and I wouldn't struggle with your names. But one of the things that everyone isn't going to see in the edits is that I botched one of your names after working with you guys for 6, 7, 8+ years. But anyway, that's the candid nature of these experiences and the candid nature of this conversation, where we're just going to get down in and talk about branding and what you each are seeing as you do your work with clients. So today we're going to jump right into a conversation. But first, let's have each of you introduce yourselves and your role and what you do here at 50 Marketing. So maybe provide some context around your evaluations and your recommendations around branding. So Andrea, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Andrea Sanner. I've been with 50 Marketing now a little over 6 years. And basically my role is client success manager. So I'm day in and day out working with clients and, kind of moving them through, reaching their goals, setting branding, which we'll be talking about. So really living day in and day out with our clients in developing the branding that they're moving forward with in the market.
Excellent. Ryan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yep. Hi, my name's Ryan Collier. I'm the video production manager. I've worked for 50 Marketing for about 4 years now. Amazing how time flies. I basically manage all the video aspects of the business, which we call the motion department. So anything with a moving image is developed by me or my editor, Kate, who's fantastic. Shout out to Kate. And I also act as a CSR as well. So in a client-facing role, just kind of managing projects with clients and just moving things forward.
Excellent. Johanna, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Johanna. I'm the content copywriter here, and I've been with 50 Marketing for just over a year now. So I help to develop kind of the voice and the style of our clients' writing, and then deliver whatever copywriting is needed for their content, whether it's website content, social media, emails, kind of do a little bit of everything.
All right. Well, thank you guys for introducing yourselves. I think that helps to provide some context so we can understand the lens through which you're looking at the branding challenge that a B2B or manufacturing company might face. And let's transition into talking about when someone comes to us, when a client shows up or a potential client, and we start to engage with them. What do we generally see from companies that are late adopters or who aren't Fortune 500 companies, who don't have a $10 million budget, who don't have 20 people on staff in their marketing department? What are we generally seeing from their branding? And what, as the title of the podcast is, what do we maybe see that's missing from their branding?
Yeah. So, from a client perspective, when, a client comes on board, usually there's one or two instances we're seeing is either they're late adopters and they don't have much out there. They may have nothing out there, or they may have one or two pieces of content, and they might be mismatched. content. So it's not really speaking as a cohesive, basically a cohesive brand. The other is, somebody who may be established that may have a bunch of content out there for audiences to review, but it's also the same point. It's all mismatched. It's not speaking to the same mission, vision, values. Who are we? What we do. So that's really the two instances that we've seen a lot of in the business.
That's so true. And Ryan, that's not only true of the website and a lot of the content that Andrea is speaking to, but video, that's almost more stark because most companies don't have a lot of video.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes to late adopters, we're seeing they may have the basics in terms of website, some kind of ad content, but usually video is an afterthought. And nowadays, of course, video is the number one way of absorbing content for customers. So it's really kind of done a 360. So it's our job to make sure that they buy into this and understand how important video is. And it's not just about making a cool video. It's just we have to make sure that that's aligning to their brand and their core message. So usually what we see is maybe a couple of videos, if that, and oftentimes we're seeing like a lack of cohesion in the branding. So logos, style guides, that kind of thing, which is essential for really building that brand.
Absolutely. And so that really deals with the late adopters. We also end up running into some folks who have invested some money into their content. They have a decent website. They have some content. They have some videos. And Johanna, maybe you could talk about sometimes when we find companies like that, they may have some fairly robust resources, but when we analyze them and take a look from their foundational marketing through their top, middle, and bottom funnel marketing and then down through their sales enablement, it's all over the board. It's like there were 7 or 8 authors at the company from different time periods and different voices and tones, and it's just not put together. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Right. Just like Andrea said, like that cohesion is really important. And that's usually what you can see is missing, because if you don't have someone just entirely dedicated to developing that style for your brand, then it is going to come from all over. And it's also just hard to see when you're on the inside as well. So sometimes just having an outside perspective to really take some time and analyze all of the different grammatical choices you're making and, just all the little mechanics of how you communicate. It can really make a big difference once that's all tied together.
So what we've talked about so far is really kind of the state of where we find companies, right? Where we find people coming to us. They're either a late adopter and they have very little to no content or activity online. So there's certainly no branding. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have more mature companies that have content, that have developed things. But then when you look at it from an outside view, from the buyer's perspective, you couldn't convict them of their brand if they were on trial, right? There's not enough evidence. We know they're a company and they do things, and let's guess they do quality and they have good customer service, and all those generic promises that everybody makes that are milquetoast, that have no impact on the market. So let's talk a little bit about once we understand the state of the market. Let's talk about one of the things that should drive this conversation is a core understanding of our ideal client profile. Because if we recognize who we are, but we don't recognize our ideal client and who we're trying to message to, we're in unilateral communication. We're just blasting our message to the market. And for it to be bilateral, for it to, go out and resonate with our ideal target market, and then they come back looking at us through that lens. That's the goal, right? So maybe let's talk about why we need to take such a deep dive into not only looking at the company and who they think they are, who they are, what they do, where they do it, why they do it, unique value proposition, brand promise, value they deliver to the market, but then also make sure we understand that ideal client profile to make sure that it is going to be bilateral communication that resonates with that target audience.
Yeah. So, speaking to, the ideal client profile, when we work with our clients, they may have something in mind, we're seeing this as our buyers. They may be speaking specifically to some of those buyers, but they may not see the whole environment of how it connects with different aspects of their branding. So I would say that we come alongside them. We help them to basically in a discovery and planning process, work out, that specific ideal client, speaking directly to them, developing different brand messaging, and then kind of taking that in an overall approach to the market. So website may require website updates. It may require sales collateral updates. It may require social media updates as well. So just taking that and kind of building the brand around that ideal client.
Absolutely. And I think whenever we look at going through those processes, the transformations we've seen have been incredible. And when we look, and Ryan, let's talk specifically about like maybe a little bit before and after. And this is a very niche manifestation or tangible representation of what we see. But when you look at some of our clients' YouTube channels, for instance, before, and it's all over the place, right? It's just like a bunch of videos that someone ran around and got and placed. And then we have consistent thumbnails, we have consistent videos, we have different playlists that are thematic that really manifest that communication the way that ideal client wants to see it. Maybe talk about what you've seen and observed with some of our clients.
Yeah, it's almost like those kind of home improvement shows where you see the before and the after. I definitely get a big kick out of that because there's nothing more rewarding for me as a CSR and a video manager to make a real difference to the way that our clients' content looks. And there's nothing more stark than social media profiles like YouTube, where you have, as you said, the beginnings. There may be nothing there, or there may be a couple of videos without descriptions, or just very minimal. And we basically take that content and use our expertise to really turn it around. So as you said, thumbnails, descriptions, SEO, and the difference is huge. And I think also as well by exploring the ideal customer is that style is a big part to play in that. So if we have a target audience, we want to make sure that we're aesthetically kind of aiming towards that target audience in terms of imagery, music, the whole 9 yards.
No, absolutely. And I think the other thing we have to look at is when we're trying to define this ideal client profile, one of the challenges we run into specifically in the copywriting function is we represent a lot of very technical clients who are very niche focused. We aren't representing people who make pizza. We are representing people who have kind of their UVP, unique value proposition, that you need a dictionary, a thesaurus, and a PhD to understand specifically what we're talking about. And let's be honest, some of the ideal clients are PhDs, are professional engineers, are very technical professionals. So that adds a layer of complexity. And Johanna, what are you seeing when you're trying to communicate so you kind of have to marry both worlds. You have to marry the technical communication with the fluffy marketing speak to kind of make that so it's attractive, right? And it doesn't sound like a class that you would take as a master's candidate in a chemistry program, right? That everybody wants to avoid. So what are you seeing when you think about that ideal client profile and dialing in the technical information and dialing in how we're able to message not only from that marketing communication, but that technical information as well?
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of one-on-one work with the client to completely understand what they're trying to communicate and understand what they hear from customers, so that we're not just giving a bunch of information that the customer doesn't necessarily need, but we're providing exactly what they're looking for and, what's going to help them understand the company and what they're going to provide for them. And like you said, just really taking in that information, making sure I understand it so that then we can infuse some more stylistic choices into it and make it more engaging and eye-catching. Because, as you said, we don't want to just deliver the information, but we want to do it in a way that communicates, the personality of the company and even the personality of the people that they're trying to reach.
Absolutely. And I think this gets into some of the tensions that we run into as we're delivering marketing. So let's pivot a little bit, and I'm going to circle back to what you just said in a couple minutes here, Johanna, but specifically around capturing the personality and the tone when we get into social media, and the second tension that we deal with. But the first tension we often deal with is we as marketers and our clients get tired of the brand message once it's established and want to change it up. Because, hey, we've been saying the same thing over and over again. Well, if it is the correct brand message, we need to say it a million times. Because if we say it a million times, it may be the first time that target market participant, that ideal client, is hearing it, and they need to embrace it and understand it for the first time. So maybe let's talk about how we try to make sure that we are communicating that same message, but we're also being creative about it so that we aren't tired, but we have to maintain the standard. We have to go and deliver that message time and time again.
Yeah, definitely. As we said, from the client perspective, they get tired of the same message, just as we get tired of our own same messages. But it's so necessary to be out there in the market so that whenever that target or ideal client is viewing it for the first time, they're seeing it. It's something that we don't want to forget about, as the typical branding message that is on repeat. We may say it a bunch of different ways, many different display options throughout the market, but it's a continued process that you want to keep on so that it's there when the buyer is ready.
Absolutely. And I think with video, Ryan, that's a whole other challenge, because we need to be catchy and punchy to get people's attention, right? We can't just say the same thing in the first 3 to 5 second hook. We have to be catchy and punchy and hook them, but then immediately we have to make sure we're on brand message, because if not, there's a tension there we see.
Absolutely. And we do that a number of ways. So in our campaigns, we optimize all our video content for a multitude of different touch points. So we have social media, we have YouTube, we have websites. So all that content is optimized for that individual platform. So we have, different shapes and sizes optimized for different devices. So this content, whilst the messaging may seem repetitive, is actually being the net is cast wide. So we make sure that we get it everywhere. So, the most amount of people can see it. Also as well, we have different iterations of videos in different style formats. So, we may have some videos which are motion graphic, motion text heavy. We may have some which are talking head videos. So yeah, the message may stay the same, but we do try and mix it up. So there are different ways we can approach telling that story. And I think that's important. But also what's important as well is consistency. So when it comes to video on social media, we need to be consistent. So for our clients, we have a schedule that we follow week to week where we're posting content at optimal times to make sure that the most amount of people can see the video. Yes, we may have seen the video 10,000 times. Yes, the client probably seen it 10,000 times, but we're fishing basically. We're casting that line and we're fishing and we're trying to reach the most amount of people using our optimization methods to do that.
So, and this goes into the second tension, Johanna, and you kind of brought it up when we were talking just a little bit ago. Whenever we look at polished versus candid and authentic content, right, there's a challenge in the copy in framing the brand message so that it is polished, it is accurate, it is repeated over and over again, but that it is also candid and authentic. Certainly we, instead of having this conversation like this, where it's very casual and we're, bouncing ideas off each other and having a conversation, we could be in front of a green screen and we could each be delivering our lines and doing that bit, or we can have this candid conversation. So there's that tension. And Johanna, maybe talk about whenever you are looking at the copywriting and your team, or you're looking at those aspects, how you have to make sure that it can be candid and authentic without having everything have to be polished by professional actors who are delivering as company spokespersons, as opposed to the real people in the company having the communication and being part of that journey.
Right. And I think it also depends on the company specifically. There might be different levels of polished versus authentic. There are some brands that the balance is leaning way more towards authentic. We use a lot more, we and I pronouns, or we're just speaking kind of directly to the customer, whereas others are a lot more professional and polished, and they're going to be a little bit more distant. But as you said, still towing that line and not being completely separate and completely kind of, you don't want to be standoffish or anything like that. And I think that a way that we kind of balance those things is not just in how we write, but what we're doing with it. So as an example, on social media, we're not just telling people that this is the brand of the company, but we're showing it through bringing in real team members and talking about, the moving parts of the organization and who's supporting it and who's doing the work. So we can present that in a polished way, but it's authentic because we are showing directly what is going on behind the scenes.
No, and I think that's absolutely right. And the new polished is just well produced. It doesn't have to be a multi-million-dollar production. If we're talking about film, it's well shot, which we can do with our remote crews and the teams we send out, or it's well produced on a website with some custom photography representing exactly the brand as opposed to any stock. I mean, we have to get rid of stock in this entire industry, and that's a separate discussion for a separate time. But when Johanna, to piggyback on that, we had a conversation in one of our social media podcast episodes with Will where we talked about meme culture and trying to bring in some more of that personality and humor and memes into B2B and manufacturing marketing. And I think that's going to be one of those tensions where we want to do more and be more relatable, but we're also going to have to rein in some of the newer voices and newer ideas in that space, because I don't know that I'm ready to participate at the TikTokification level of that movement, but I'm sure I'll be drug kicking and screaming. The last tension I want to talk about, and this is one that I think is important, especially when we're working with the C-suite, Well, we're working with an owner and a founder in part of the branding process. And this is a trap that we can all fall into, and it is aspirational branding. If we start to talk about the brand of who we want to become 2, 3, 5 years from now, without also defining the brand we are today. So first, we have to define the brand we are today and the promise that we can deliver today, because that is what we can execute as a company, not only from a marketing standpoint, but from a sales standpoint, through customer service, and then through customer experience. So we have to communicate that. If we start to talk about aspirational branding, it needs to be an add-on or like kind of an afterthought to say, hey, here's who we are and here's where we're heading. What are you all seeing as we're dealing with clients? And we get back to something we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is when we get tactical about the brand standard of really driving our clients towards that brand standard and making sure we're staying focused on who we are today, as opposed to, oh, this is our 7 to 10 year business plan or a 3 to 5 year business plan. So Andrea, maybe what are you seeing with that as you deal with clients?
Yeah. There's certainly a juggling act when it comes to clients, because they're excited about the future, which is great and awesome, and we want to be there alongside them. But you kind of have to bring them back down to earth a little bit and say, okay, here's where we are, here's who you are today, and we have to continue that messaging to your ideal client profile and kind of just keep getting that messaging out there. And we can do those mentions, as you said, kind of as an afterthought, like, yeah, here's who we are and what we do today. We're building towards this future, and it really helps with the whole ecosystem of the from the client's perspective to then, their marketing and their sales team, so that they're not so much up in the clouds, they're more down to earth, and delivering on the items that they're marketing with today.
Well, and Ryan, whenever we look at bottom of the funnel video, which we've developed for some clients, and we think about that bottom of the funnel communication, that almost exclusively has to focus on the brand promise today, because they've moved from attraction and awareness down through to, hey, I'm really interested in buying, and I'm moving down through the process. We have to stay focused on the brand promise today and not focus on aspirational.
Yeah. And there's a reason that candid content is so popular nowadays, because people can smell a rat a mile away, and they know when a corporation or company are promising things that they can't deliver. And so it's important for us as an agency and for the client to manage expectations and be transparent through the process. So as Andrea said, is a juggling act, and we have to make sure that we manage expectations for the clients. But that's what we're here for as well. We're here to make sure that we can provide the foundations and building blocks for the aspiration, and that in the future, by the content and the method that we utilize, we can take them to that next level. But we have to communicate that there's a process that we have to follow. We have to take our medicine. We have to follow that line, and we will get there, but it will take time, and we have to be transparent with our audiences about what we can deliver at this present point. As you said, we can have aspirational messaging saying this is where we're going in the future, but right now we need to be honest about what we can deliver.
So I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about getting tactical. And one of the things I'm very pleased with the team at 50 Marketing has been able to do, and the roadmap and playbook they've been able to develop, is one that understands our clientele. So I've had, in fact, I had a conversation with the CEO several weeks ago. They said, Bill, we had a quote from another agency to help us with our branding. They said it was going to take 6 to 9 months and cost $150,000. And we just didn't have the budget to invest that much in a brand and spend that much time. And we've taken a different approach. We take a much more aggressive approach from a timeline and budgetary standpoint, so that if we need to, in 45 to 60 days from the word go, we can develop some of these tactical standards in style guides, brand guides, copywriting guides, video style guides, and really work with the client to get that messaging dialed in really quickly with our framework, and then allow us to then immediately impact what we're developing for that client. So in that same 6 to 9 month period that some other branding agency would just get a branding effort completed, we can not only help rebrand the company, establish a standard for the entire organization across all levels, but then start to develop content for 3 or 4 months and actually have that brand living and breathing out on their website, out on YouTube, in their social channels. So I think that's kind of the tactical thing I've seen you as a team been able to develop and execute consistently. So let's just talk about that a little bit. And let's go through a very 50,000 foot oversimplification process of what you guys do, but let's just talk about it. So the first thing we talk about tactically is if a client comes to us and starts an engagement, we want to evaluate their brand as it exists in the marketplace, not how they think it exists, but how it truly exists. So maybe let's talk about, let's start with you, Johanna, and talk about how we start with looking at the messaging that we want to be able to convict them at in front of a jury of their peers if we have to, that message is what we see, and then provide that to the client so we really evaluate where they are today.
So what we like to do, as you said, is start looking broadly, kind of extracting everything that they have out there, and putting that all down on paper next to each other and showing, okay, these are the typical statements that we have out and about for your company, and this is kind of what they're communicating, and this is kind of the tone and the style that we see right now. And then from there, it's where are you and where are you wanting to be? So what might we want to change? What might we want to tweak so that it is really effective at communicating who you are right now? And just creating those kind of standard statements and standard pieces of messaging that can be consistently used anywhere, so that kind of anyone in the company who needs to can extract from that standard and use it where it applies. And then from there, we would go further and kind of take a look at everything that's out there and make adjustments as needed so that everything is cohesive and really fits in with that style.
Absolutely. And one of the things we've been doing for years, Andrea, you and I've been through many projects with this. We use what we call a now and then analysis, which is really around aspire, emulate, avoid, and really define, so the now and then analysis is, okay, who we are now and where we want to go, but then also recognizing our place in the market and making sure we're recognizing our competitors, who's in the marketplace, and our, where we exist and where we sit in the market while we prepare that messaging for that ideal client. So maybe talk a little bit about how we look at that now and then analysis, as well as that aspire, emulate, avoid, to really help the clients dial in not what they think, not what they believe, not what's been there for forever, but what they need to be communicating about their brand promise to their ideal client.
Yeah, definitely. This pretty much is one of the first things that we do with a client. I mean, alongside the discovery and planning and kind of coming up to speed on who the client is and who they serve and their market and everything. We basically are auditing everything that's out there from a fresh perspective. We're coming in fresh, so we can kind of be a little bit more judgmental, I guess I could say, of what's out there in the market. But yeah, it's good though from our perspective to give that feedback back to the client, so that they're very aware of, okay, here's a mismatch in what you're saying in the market today versus what it could be with the, this new branding that we're going to be doing with the initiatives that we're doing. So the process of auditing and coming up to speed on a client is so very important, because that gets us both aligned with the client and as a marketing firm with ourselves to determine where are we going with this client and building that plan and scope.
So that allows us to then build these components of a true brand standard. And Ryan, whenever you look at the diverse array of options that your team and the entire team has to prepare the brand message, like for the containers it has to go in, whether that container is a website or whether it's a blog article or whether it's a reel, a short, a long form video, social media post, we really need that brand standard to be dialed in, not only visually, but from a messaging standpoint, because we then have to make sure that that permeates throughout the entire internet communication sphere, whatever you want to call it, all the touch points to make sure it's effective. So maybe talk about how once we go through that process, develop those standards, how that's so important to guide everything we do.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we have like the logistical and technical considerations, and we have our way of doing things which are optimized for the audience. But I think before we get into any of that, we need to understand the client, and we need to understand the message that they want to get out there. So I think Aspire, Emulate, and Avoid is a very effective way, less so for us, but I think more so for the client, because we know video, we know ads, we know graphic design, but the client may not be aware of what they can get out there. So our job is to basically show them, whilst auditing, the stuff that they have, our job is to show them what they can have, and to understand what kind of style choices we can implement that will reach the audience they want to reach. So we have a client in the Northeast where when we brought them on board for video, we showed them a lot of Ford F-150 ads, built Ford tough, that kind of stuff. Obviously that wouldn't work for a pharmaceutical company in California.
Sure.
So yeah, our job in the early stages is just to kind of get the DNA, get the taste, get the flavor of the company, and find examples that we can show them that we can get that feel and atmosphere and that vibe and kind of deliver it for them. And that's very important for them to get a sense of what we can deliver for them.
And all of this in the brand standard has to be able to be boiled down into as few words as possible to communicate that brand promise, that value proposition, that differentiating statement or set of statements to the client, or for the client to the market, right? And Johanna, when we look at the copywriting and we go through that process and establish those standards that are then going to be repositioned and repackaged and distributed all over the internet, it's really about making sure that that set of brand standard statements are really, really dialed in. And you talked about it before, tone, voice, all the grammar things that you get excited about. I just try to remember to spell grammar AR because my fourth grade grammar teacher was crazy about that. Shout out to Mrs. Bantley. She was insane. But maybe talk about those, that the importance of dialing in those statements.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important because those are the statements that are going to be everywhere. And so what I really enjoy is getting to work closely with the client to make sure that we're saying it, in just the right way, that they're comfortable with, that they're happy with it. But then also maybe going a little bit beyond what they had originally imagined, because as we said, we're not just trying to communicate who they are and what they do, but do so in an engaging and attracting way. So, it's not just saying what they do, but it's adding a spin, it's adding character and personality. And I just think even in the B2B space, having that creativity can make such a huge difference. And then, like we said, once you have that those set standard statements, I think it creates a lot of comfort and confidence for anyone in the organization to be able to use them. And it also just sets an example of, okay, this is how we are going to communicate as a company. Even if someone is developing something on their own, they have those examples to look to. And I just think it's really helpful for anyone involved.
Well, team, this has been a great discussion. We didn't think we'd have anything to talk about, and here we are at almost an hour, right? So we'll see after they get done editing it and all of the
It'll be 10 minutes.
It'll be 10 minutes, but that's okay. It'll be like there was no host. Bill wasn't there. Anyway, so no, team, thank you so much for being part of this conversation, because while we want to provide value in the Missing Half podcast, where we talk about some of these theoretical constructs and our philosophies and approaches to marketing and what's missing for manufacturers and B2B marketers, we also want to provide tactical advice as well on how to move it forward. So if someone's viewing this and they feel they can tackle it on their own, great. Use what we've provided today as a resource and go at it. If you feel you can't tackle it on your own and you engage an agency like ours or others, this will maybe give you a frame of reference of things to talk about and the importance. Or if you're selling to the C-suite and need to kind of sell the concept, maybe this will be valuable as well. One of the other things I'd like to call out, if you have additional interests in this topic, please reference the prior episode where we talked more about some of the statistics, frameworks, tensions, and other aspects of branding. So there's a little bit of a series going here that could hopefully be valuable to you and your organization. But I just want to thank you guys, Andrea, Ryan, Johanna. Thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate the conversation. And we're going to run this back on more topics. So sorry, but you guys are in.
My pleasure.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining the Missing Half podcast, where we're discovering what's missing in manufacturing and B2B marketing. Like, share, or subscribe. Thanks, and have a great day.